All right, I'm gonna go live right now.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, hello everyone and welcome to today's Fusion Friday. My name is Alex Alvarez, application engineer here at KETIV Technologies. So happy Friday, everyone. Hopefully everyone has been having a productive week so far. Hopefully everyone has been also keeping safe, with everything going around. But again, thank you all for joining us. For today, we actually have something that is very special. And that's because it's been something that's been asked quite a lot from a lot of our customers. Even on some of the calls that I've been, trying to talk about Fusion 360, the number one thing that usually came up is, okay, does Fusion 360 do nesting? And again, this is something that has been in the works for quite some time. It has been out for a couple months now, but again, just wanted to do a quick introduction on the new functionality. So again, this demo or this webinar is going to walk you guys through the essentially the overall workflow of how to go from an actual assembly, a sheet metal assembly, or regular assembly, right? If you want to nest maybe specific components to the manufacturing or the actual toolpath creation of these components. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Again, if you guys have any questions, any comments, feel free to leave them out in the chat box there, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the session. So again, as always, we do want to start off with why are we doing this webinar in the first place? So again, I just mentioned a little bit about the nesting extension, and again, that is one thing that I want to be very clear about. This is called the nesting and fabrication extension. Right, so if you guys are brand new to Fusion 360 and you guys aren't quite sure what an extension means, very similar to an add-in, right? It just has a different terminology. So that does mean that you do have to essentially, in this case, purchase additional functionality to use the nesting and fabrication extension. So again, I'll go into details as to how much does that cost, how do you access it, and getting some possible trials for some of you guys. So again, we want to talk a little bit about the nesting automation, and probably the biggest takeaway here that I want you guys to learn from the webinar is how this is fully integrated, right? So there's plenty of tools out there that can do nesting. There's plenty of tools out there that can do CAD, but there's not that many tools that can do both in one single software, one single platform. You have tools, of course, that can do CAM. You have tools that can do nesting, but again, very limited tools that can do both in kind of the single platform. So again, I want you guys to kind of really see the power behind the CAD, the nesting, and then of course the CAM that's built into this software. We're going to talk about how do you increase efficiency, right? Having that interconnected workflow, having essentially all three different softwares, or not softwares, but technologies communicating with one another. How does that make you be a little bit faster, right? And then also make it a little bit more streamlined for everyone at the shop floor. So that's pretty much going to be the why for this webinar. And of course, we're going to be talking about how do we go from your very initial shape selection all the way down to the nesting study creation. Right? Is there just a single button that you click? Is there some specific steps that you need to take? What does that look like essentially? So again, there are going to be a few steps to this nesting workflow. The very first thing that you have to do, and this is what Fusion 360 is calling it, but you do have to do what we call nesting preparation. Reason for that is maybe you want to select a specific component. Maybe your assembly has components that you don't want to nest. Right, so this is where you go into the nesting preparation dialog box, and then you select which components are going to get nested and which components are going to get excluded from your nesting study. The next thing after that is you're going to go or head over to the manufacturing tab, go into the nesting sources, and then kind of carry out that workflow, right? So again, making sure that you select the correct properties. If maybe there's a part that you don't want to have rotated, maybe there's a specific orientation that you want to keep it in, that's where the nesting sources is going to take place. The process material library, right? So which kind of materials are we working with? Now, the neat thing about this is that the process material library does get updated automatically. What I mean by that is it it looks at the parts that you have, it looks at the thicknesses of the parts that you have, and it does add material to the process material library automatically, right? And we'll go ahead and kind of show you guys what that looks like. And then finally, the last step is going to be to create that nest study. So again, we're going to be talking about these four steps throughout this this live demonstration. Again, if you guys have any questions on that, if there's something that you guys aren't quite understanding and you probably want a little bit more clarification on that, I can jump on the call afterwards if needed. All right. So like I said, this is going to be a part of the manufacturing extension. If you guys aren't too familiar with manufacturing extensions inside of Fusion, it is something that's relatively new. I want to say within the last 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, Autodesk released what they're calling manufacturing extensions for Fusion 360. Now, these extensions, in my eyes, are what's keeping the price down for Fusion 360, right? So I think I haven't been keeping up to date too well with the pricing, but I think right now Fusion is set at a price of $400, right? Which, if you look around, you're really not going to find another tool with this much capability under that price range. So in my eyes, again, the reason why it's so low is because they're allowing people to buy technology or features that are going to be important to them. Right. So they're not just assuming that everyone is going to need nesting. They're not just assuming that everyone is going to need 5-axis enhanced capabilities. They're making these options available to only people that need them. Right. And that's how they're able to charge on a specific technology basis or on a specific feature based, I guess, subscription, if you will. So again, this is going to be an extension. Not everyone is going to need nesting. Right, it is going to be a majority of customers out there, but not everyone is going to need nesting. So instead of raising the price for Fusion 360, they're making this an extension, something that you guys can purchase individually, and then you guys can go ahead and try it out, and then either have it for the whole year, have it for the month. Maybe it's a day project that you kind of want to knock this out in. You guys do have some flexibility on that. Right, which leads me to these 3 bullet points here on the right-hand side. So if this is your first time using the nesting and fabrication extension, you do have the option for a 7-day trial. Right, and like I said, if you want to, maybe you have a project that comes in through the door, you're not really using nesting too much, but you do have, maybe a certain weeks of the month that you get these kinds of projects. You can purchase the manufacturing extension for 25 cloud credits, right? If you guys aren't too familiar with cloud credits, $1 is equivalent to 1 cloud credit. Or if you're using the nesting and fabrication quite extensively, then it makes sense to go ahead and purchase this for the year. All right. So again, a few options out there. Let me know what you guys think. I'm kind of curious to see what the audience feels about this, right? Are you guys okay with keeping the Fusion 360's price point relatively low and then paying additional for the extensions? Or would you guys want to see a software that kind of incorporates everything, but it has a little bit of a higher price point? If you guys are watching on YouTube, let me know in the comment as well. I'm kind of curious to see what you guys think about all of this. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the today's live demonstration. Again, ask questions. These webinars at the end of the day are for you guys. So if you guys aren't really getting much benefit from them, or if there's something that you guys are missing, it's not beneficial to both of us, right? So again, let us know how we can improve, or how we can make these a little bit better for you guys. So let's go ahead and jump in right into Fusion 360. Again, if this is your first time inside of the software, this is exactly as it seems now. A common question I get to this day is, well, how do I know if I'm on the latest Fusion 360, right? Mine looks a little bit different, which it really shouldn't look different, but that is a common question I get, right? So again, Fusion 360 is a cloud-based software. What that means is that it does have some sort of connection to the internet. It does have connections to Amazon servers, and that's how your data is stored. Apart from that, that means that you're always going to be on the latest version of Fusion 360, right? Being that you're connected to the internet, there's no way for you to control which version you're on or which version you're going to stay on. You do have usually this little time clock here at the top that indicates that there's a new version for the software, and that you need to restart Fusion 360. So you can try to stay inside of the software without restarting for maybe a couple days. I haven't tried it, but eventually it is going to restart on itself, and it is going to update for you guys. So yeah, pros and cons to having a cloud software, right? I in my eyes, even though some people don't agree with me or might not agree with me here, you're always on the latest version, right? So you don't need to worry about, if customer A and customer B are on the same version, you guys are always going to be on that same version. Here on the data panel, this is how you guys are going to be storing your projects. And now, reason why I bring this up, even if you guys are familiar with Fusion 360, is because there are some benefits to using your Fusion team, right? If you guys are still somewhat confused about Fusion teams and your single user storage, we do have webinars out there that kind of explain what the differences are between the two. Now, I'll go ahead and explain here in a couple minutes why you would want to use a Fusion team. But again, if you guys aren't too familiar with these two differences, or these two different, what I would call teams and single or personal use Fusion 360, please go ahead and watch a video on this and make sure that you're aware of how the Fusion team works. But anyways, again, data panel here on the left-hand side. Here's how essentially Fusion 360 stores all of its projects, all of its data, right? If you click on a specific project, that project you can now share with people who have access to Fusion 360 as well, right? So again, if you want to share this information, if you want to share this with the vendor, if you want to share this with the customer, you can now give them full access to this data, and then show them exactly what you guys are currently working on. Now, some downfalls to that, right? Because again, you don't have any security measures as of right now for the part levels, right? So it's not like you can go in here and lock the part. I don't want to kind of speak for Autodesk, but I think that might be something in the future that we might see. As of right now, what you can do if you do want to share this information without allowing people to make some sort of modification to it or to make any edits to it, you can select the part and then just share the public link, right? And again, I'm bringing this up because I just had a call just a couple minutes ago with a customer who wasn't aware of that functionality within Fusion, right? So again, if you right click on the part, you can share a public link. What's nice about this link is that it's always live, no matter what version of the assembly you're on, right? So this link is always going to be up to date with whatever version you're on. You don't need to recreate this link. And then down here, you have the option to deselect allow item to be downloaded, right? And now we can share this assembly with the vendors, with the customer. They can see it in their browser, internet browser. They don't need Fusion 360 at that point. And then they can go ahead and take a look at the assembly. Right, so really neat functionality. Again, we have webinars on all of this that go a little bit deeper into this kind of functionality. Just giving you guys just a high level overview of the capabilities here. So, anyways, sticking with really this year's theme, we're gonna be talking about the hand sanitizer stand here. I wish I could take credit for this. I actually found a similar design on GrabCAD. And I thought it was pretty neat. So I was like, okay, let's go ahead and just show that for Fusion Friday. Again, most of these components are going to be sheet metal, right? So we actually have, looks like 3 components that are sheet metal. Not only can you tell by looking at the parts, right? But you can also tell by looking at your browser here on the left-hand side, right? So you have your base, you have your stand, and you have your bottle stand, and they are represented with this little sheet metal icon that you see here. Now, when you're going to be doing nesting, or if you guys do purchase the manufacturing extension for nesting, it is going to be really critical that you guys follow the correct, what I would call, the design standards within Fusion 360. Now, what does that mean? A lot of people, when they're working inside of Fusion, they go about creating their models, but then they start creating a multi-body, what I would consider a multi-body part. Right, so each one of these would be bodies. Let me show you guys. Well, actually, let me go through the nesting preparation first, and then I'll show you guys why this is really important. So I'm going to go ahead and close the data panel, just get some more real estate here. And like I said, the first step inside of the nesting workflow is going to be to go through the nesting preparation. right? So where exactly is that going to be found? That's actually going to be found inside of your design tab, right? And this is what throws a lot of people off, because if you go to your manufacturer tab, right? And again, these are all the different environments that we can work with. But if we go to the manufacturing tab, this is where you see the fabrication, right? The fabrication panel. And this is where all the nesting commands can be found, right? So you have your sources, you have your nest, and then after that, if you want to apply some sort of G code, you can. But anyways, this is where a lot of people think that they can find their nesting preparation, but that is not the case, right? So again, you have to make sure that you're inside of this design environment. We're going to work our way to the tools tab, and then you're going to see that nest preparation command here at the top, right? So very, very unique command. And what I mean by that is that if you guys are coming from Inventor, and I'm taking a look at the participants here. I know some of you guys have used Inventor in the past. So if you guys are coming from Inventor, the nesting utility that's built into Inventor is actually very, very similar to the nesting and fabrication extension here in Fusion, right? So you guys, if you guys are coming from the nesting utility, you guys are going to see some very similar similarities inside of between the two. But anyways, one of the differences is going to be this nesting preparation, right? So what is this nesting preparation doing exactly? This is essentially your way of telling the software, hey, these are the components that I want to nest, and these are the components that I want to ignore, right? And then you can kind of see here what's going on. So you can ignore specific components, and then the way that Fusion 360 works is that it filters through these components. If it finds a sheet metal part, it's going to automatically pick it up that it's sheet metal. If it finds that it's just a regular part, right? So we do have a couple McMaster car components here. I think it's the wing nuts here at the back. Right, so it found those and it selected those as selected entities, right? So why is it doing selected entities? Reason why it's doing that is because we can come up here to the top, and I'm going to uncheck sketches, and we now have the option to ignore all of these selected entities, right? So I'm going to click on that. And you can kind of see here, a little hard to see because they're both kind of gray, but you can see that one of them is a check mark, and then the other one is going to have an X across it, right? And so what it's doing is it's looking through whichever components it picked up as selected entities, and it's going and it's marking an X on them, right? So the bottle here, there's an X. The two wing nuts in the back, there's an X. The stand, right, there's an X right next to it. And you might be asking yourself, well, why is there an X next to the stand, right? So let me go ahead and expand this. Hopefully you guys can kind of see what happened there. Take a look at the two differences between the base and then the stand here, right? There's something missing inside of the stand that the base currently has, right? And what is that? That is going to be the flat pattern. So in order to make sure that you nest these shapes properly, you have to have a nest or a flat pattern available within that component. If you don't, it's going to pick it up as a regular part, and it's not going to nest it properly. Right. So that's a pretty easy fix. How do we go back and how do we add that that flat pattern? We're going to go ahead and again activate the component. Right. So again, making sure that we have our correct processes here. We're going to go to the stand. You can now go into the sheet metal tab. Right, you have a few options here. You can do create flat pattern. You can modify sheet metal rules. We're going to go ahead and say create flat pattern for this. Which one is the stationary face? Stationary face is this one. Say okay to that. Right, gives us a preview of the flat pattern. We can go ahead and hit the green check mark, and just like that, we created a flat pattern for that component. Right, so again, very, very easy to go back and make modifications to it if you wanted to. You can add cuts to it if you wanted to. Nothing is stopping us from really moving forward here and making modifications to it. All right, so let's go back to that nesting preparation. Let's see how it looks like now. Right, so again, I'm going to go ahead and select the selected entities, and you can now see that we get that green check or the check mark right next to the stand now. Right, so very, very important. Again, that is the first step. The nesting preparation is going to be the first step here that we are going to take into account. Now, a little bit more of the nesting preparation, you do have options here, right? So maybe you don't want it to be a selected entity. You can go in here and select it that it's a sheet metal part, right? So maybe this part is imported and it doesn't pick up that it's a sheet metal part automatically. You can come in here and select it as a sheet metal part, right? Maybe it's a sketch that you want to use and you want to use to nest. You can do that. I'd be cautious with that just for now, because I have seen a few glitches with some of the sketches, but just be aware that you can select sketches with that. Or you can just completely ignore it, right? If it doesn't ignore it automatically, you can ignore it manually here. So a few options. You can also change the thickness, right? So if you don't want it to calculate the thickness automatically, maybe you want it to deviate, and that goes the same for any of these parts. Even if it's a sheet metal part, you can deviate in thickness here at the very bottom, right? But again, once you have that, you can go ahead. I'm going to just say ignore, say okay, and then that was the nesting preparation, right? Now, why is it important to have different components here? Let me show you guys, right? So again, I mentioned that I actually uploaded this part, or I borrowed this design idea from GrabCAD. So let me go ahead and upload the original design here. Let me go into my downloads real quick. And just let it upload, right? So let's go ahead and open up this part now and see what's going on, right? So there's a few issues with this part. That's not really what's going on here, but one of the things that this person did is, so they did create some sheet metal components. That's great, but if you take a look at this very top node, right? And again, if you've been using Fusion 360 for a while, you'll understand kind of what's going on here, right? So you have different bodies here, and these all seem to be sheet metal parts, right? And that's fine. So they're sheet metal, but if you take a look at what happens now if we do a sheet metal, if we do a nesting preparation here, it's not going to pick those up, right? So it picks up the bottom pedal, which is this one, or the bottom paddle looks like, right? And it doesn't even pick up that it's a sheet metal part. Why is that? We just discussed that it doesn't have a flat pattern, right? It picks up the additional weight. Again, it's a sheet metal part, but it doesn't have a flat pattern, so it doesn't pick it up here as a sheet metal component. So again, be careful with that. Again, you have to make sure that you kind of adhere to the golden rule of Fusion 360, right? Which is saving, if this is going to be an assembly, save the top node, save the parent file, and then start creating, right click, new components, and then specify that it's a sheet metal part, right? And then that's going to ensure that you go through this process correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out so you don't save. All right, so again, that was the first step. I'm just going to go ahead and click on this, make sure nothing changed. Everything looks good here, right? And it shows you a little preview here at the bottom. Don't worry too much about the overlapping. It's really just showing you a preview of what the flat patterns should look like, right? So that looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And now we're really going to go into the meat and potatoes of the nesting here. So I'm going to go into the manufacturer environment. And this is where, again, if you're coming from inventor nesting, this is where it's going to look very, very similar, right? So even the workflow that you see here is somewhat similar in the sense that you're going to have the sources, right? So you're going to have which sources, which parts you want to go ahead and nest. You're going to have the actual nesting. So once you're ready to create your study, this is the command that you're going to be using. We're not really going to talk about these just yet, but we will in just a second. And then probably the most important commands here are going to be these two, right? Your process material library and the material and packaging presets. So if we click on this process material library, again, being that we did the nesting study or the nesting preparation beforehand, it was automatically able to pick up some specific materials, right? So our material thicknesses, right? So I think I have a 14 and a 12 gauge material, stainless steel. So it automatically picked up the thickness for those, and it added it to this materials and packaging inside of my process material library. Now, if this is your first time seeing this kind of dialog box, it's really, really neat. What it does is it's laying out the different materials that you can select from, right? Or that you have added or that you have created. And for each material, you have what Autodesk calls packaging, right? So the packaging is going to be the actual sheet that you're going to be cutting. So we can have the same material, but we can have different sheet sizes here. So you can have different packagings, right? So keep that in mind as we're going through this. You can have different packagings or different sheet sizes for any one of these parts. So anyways, for this 14 gauge, right, we have packaging 8. Here on the right-hand side, you're going to see some information regarding the sheet size, right? So we already have a predefined 48-inch by 108, right? So 4 feet by 9 feet, I think. And then the cost associated to it. Now, you don't need to fill out the cost. The only thing that I would say that you need to fill out, or that I wouldn't say that you would, you have to fill out, is going to be the dimensions here, right? Because this is what the nesting study is going to use to correctly nest your parts. So you have to have some sort of values inside of the length and the width. You can change the type, right? So if this is a roll that you're going to be cutting off of, you can select that as your starting point, right? So for us, it's a rectangular plate. So we're going to go ahead and just use that option. Now, for this specific packaging, you're going to have nesting options, right? So the left trim, right trim, top trim. If you want to stay away from the left, top, or right, you do have the option to change this value, right? So I'm not really going to change that here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make this a global parameter, right? So instead of changing it for this specific package, I actually want to change that for all of the packagings if I were to create additional packagings, right? So what I mean by that is I can change the item separation here, right? So how far are the parts going to be inside of this packaging or separated from one another? You can go ahead and specify this here. So I'm going to say I want these to be 0.2 inches away from each other. The frame width, right? So how far away do you want to be from the edge of the actual stock? For us, it's typically going to be 1/4 of an inch, right? So bring that down to 0.25. You have additional adjustments here. If you want to allow the parts to rotate 90, 180, 270, based off of those adjustments, you can add deviations, right? So maybe you want a deviation angle of 10 degrees. And from that deviation angle, each increment is going to be 2 degrees, right? So what that means is that you can have an 80 degree, yeah. So you can deviate from 90, right? So it can either be 80 or 100. And then it can be 82, 84, 86, 88, or it can be 90, right? So that's what this right here is indicating. So for us, I'm going to keep it at 0 for the deviation angle, right? Oops. Or you can even keep it, if you want to keep it at 10, just to see kind of what it's doing, right? It does have some little handles here that you can go ahead and manipulate. If at any point you guys weren't too familiar, or maybe you didn't understand exactly what this is, what any of these properties are filling out, you do have the help option. And again, normally I wouldn't point this out because this is, I think this is a bug right now. But if you click on the little help icon, nothing happens, right? So normally I would expect a browser to come up. It's not showing up, right? It kind of just does nothing at this point, right? It just shows us the little icon there. So no worries, you can still access that. If I go to Fusion 360 nesting inside of Google, I think it is going to just give me 1 second here. Yeah, so we have the resources, right? So you can always Google that and it's going to take you directly to the actual documentation for it, right? And in here, it's going to go a little bit more in depth than what I'm doing into some of these options. But again, really, really nice functionality within the software. But again, it for some reason, just the help is unavailable at the moment. So anyways, that explains the packaging here, right? So again, you can set the actual dimensions, you can set the actual shape, the cost, and then from there, I'm going to go ahead and press OK, right? Same thing for this packaging 5, right? So we have a 95 by 95 plate here that we're working with, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Once you set your process material library, right? You really are good to go. You can go into your component sources, make sure that you verify all the components that you want to get nested are getting nested, and then you can go ahead and create the study. What I wanted to point out though is that you can actually save some material and packaging presets to the cloud, right? So if you're working in a team, and this is again where working with Fusion team is really beneficial, because if you're working in a team, if you're the one that's kind of overseeing this, you're the one that's going to create your materials first, right? You're going to create the different packagings, maybe the costing associated with that, all the good details that go into creating a good nest. Once all of that is set, you want to make sure that you save that as a preset, right? And reason for that is because anyone that has access to the Fusion team that you're a part of is going to have access to those materials, right? So the first thing that you would want to do is you would want to save all of your materials or your material library, your current material library as a preset, right? And that's just as easy as just clicking add, giving it a name, and then it's going to save it automatically. I notice that I have two. I have KETIV materials, and then I have KETIV here. So how do you bring it up, or how does the user bring it up then when they're selecting it? Well, the way that they go about it is that when they open up process material library, they're going to go ahead and say add from preset, right? And now they have the option to add specific materials, right? Either from KETIV materials, whatever presets are available to them inside of that Fusion team, they're going to be able to add those same materials, right? And now those same settings that you selected are the same settings that that user is going to experience as well. Now, the nice thing about that is that if you make a change or some sort of an update to that material or that packaging, you can go ahead and say sync from preset, right? And it's going to update any material that you selected or that you have as a part of the preset, right? So it's a really, really nice functionality. Again, just one of the powers of the cloud being that everything is going to be connected now. So anyways, running a little short on time here. So let me go ahead and speed this up just a little bit more. The next step actually is going to be your component sources, right? So if we take a look at this, again, if you're coming from Inventor nesting, it's gonna look somewhat similar. Right now we're seeing what we call the tree browser form, right? So it's gonna show you the parts that are getting nested. How do I know these parts are getting nested? Because it's actually showing me the nesting properties, right? So the base is getting nested, the stand is getting nested, and so is the bottle stand, right? These other components are grayed out essentially, right? They don't have any nesting properties, therefore they're not going to be nested here. Now it's a little confusing, and this, to be honest, it kind of threw me off a little bit too. But if you take a look here, it's going to show you the just the flat pattern, right? So that's not the software duplicating these components. It's just giving you a preview of what the flat pattern looks like here at the very bottom. So what I normally like to do instead is I like to change this to be a list view or a table view, right? And now you can cycle through these components. What's even nicer, I guess, about this is that you can cycle through the different views, right? So you can take a look at the flat pattern for it. You can take a look at the front, left, top, home, isometric, right? So a lot of details going on within this dialog box. And then probably the last little dialog box here is going to be the nest dialog box, right? So you can deviate from the actual bill of material quantity, right? So this assembly only has one. If you wanted two of these, you can go ahead and change that value here manually, which is one thing that I don't think you can do inside of the Inventor nesting utility. I think there's workarounds for that, but you can't really do that manually, right? Inside of Inventor nesting. So again, just know that you do have the ability here. There's a better way to change the quantities in the next step. So I'll go ahead and actually point that out in just a bit. But in here, you have the option to change the deviation angle, change the increment, right? The orientation. This is really important if you guys are working with material grain, right? So if you want the material grain to go in a specific direction, it's always based off of the x-axis, right? So when you create your flat pattern, just be aware of where the x-axis is at, and you want to make sure that you match the grain, right? So the orientation grain here with whatever packaging you're going to be using, right? So there's a few videos that explain that a little bit better, but just be aware that you do have the option to change the grain orientation, right? If you wanted to do that. But anyways, these are the three components that I'm going to go ahead and nest. Everything here looks good. I'm going to go ahead and bind this to the actual material properties, right? So I'm not going to change any of that. Press OK. The last step here is going to be to create a nest study, right? And again, there's a lot going on here. I'll take it kind of tab by tab. The first tab is really indicating what's going on with the nesting, right? Do you just want to nest this one time? Do you want to nest this multiple times, right? So really this value, what it's doing is it's going to look at the bill of materials quantity and it's going to multiply that by whatever value you have inside of here, right? The stack size, if you can stack multiple sheets, it's going to take that into account as well, right? So specifies the number of duplicate material sheets that will be stacked together for cutting. So it does take that into account, right, when you're specifying some of these job quantities. Now, for me, though, instead of doing that or using the single value, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to say multi-value, and I want to say that I'm going to make 15 of these assemblies, right? So 15 of these assemblies, and then I just want all of these components to get nested, right? And then go ahead and show me that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say 15 of these assemblies. I want to automatically calculate the nest, right? And I want to be able to modify the nest here and manage it at the end of it. So again, if you have a specific shape, so if a shape got by and you don't want to nest it, you can go ahead and deselect it here if you wanted to. Right now it tells you how many parts are going to be nested here. Packaging, just giving you an overview of the packaging. This is where you can actually add multiple sheets, right? So if you wanted to have, so if you had a different sheet size, let's say packaging 8, right? You can add that in here as well. And you can select which one gets used, right? So the filtering for which one gets used. So you can use it kind of in order, whichever one, if maybe some of these components fit better in a smaller sheet size, it's going to go ahead and find that for you, or just the best mix, right? So the cost efficient, so based off of the price of the sheet and then how much remnants are going to be left over, right? So there's a lot of functionality in here. Again, this is just more of a high level overview, but this is something that you guys can test out here on your own. Global parameters, again, if you want to, probably the most important one here that I would say is going to be this bottom one. If you want to go ahead and minimize the length and the width, it's going to force most of your components to the bottom left-hand corner, right? If you want to minimize the width, it's going to force most of your components to the bottom of the sheet. Minimize length, it's going to force most of your components to the left of the sheet, right? So for me, I'm going to keep it at minimize length and width. The output, this is probably really, really important, because if you want to create a toolpath or some sort of a CAM program out of this, you're going to want to make sure that you have this checked on, right? So you want to make sure that you have the create manufacturing model checked on. Otherwise, it's not going to allow you to create a setup for it or add toolpaths to it. Now, a lot of people, what they do is they don't want the manufacturing model. Really, all they're looking for is a nested DXF, right? So instead of that, you would uncheck it and show part outlines, right? You can show part outlines. If you uncheck this, I think it automatically reports the DXF for us. And I'll go ahead and test it out here in just a bit. But again, if really important, if you want to make sure that you have the actual model to machine, you have to make sure you select this create manufacturing model. Right? I want to include the stock. And I'm going to go ahead and say okay. Okay. All right. Now it's going to show us a few components here, right? So it's going to show you the nest 1, and then it's going to show you the nest 2, right? So this nesting study, you can kind of see what's going on here, right? So it splits it up into different sheet sizes, right? So if you have different materials, which in this case we had a 12 gauge and a 14 gauge, it's going to go ahead and split it up for us, right? So it did this part. It nested the components up here, and these are the 14 gauge. And then these components, again, still 14 gauge, and then the 12 gauge components are going to be up here at the top, right? So now with this, again, being that we selected the manufacturing model, or that being that we selected create a manufacturing model, you can kind of see what happened here, right? So it actually creates the stock for us, right? And again, it took into account the frame width here that we were going for and the item separation, right? But it actually did create this stock as a solid body, right? So why is this important? Well, this is important because now what I can do is I can right click on this sheet and I can say create setup for manufacturing model, right? And this is really, really neat because again, it automatically knows the orientation, right? I don't need to set any of that up. It automatically sets it to cutting for the operation type. It automatically knows which model I want to go ahead and use. It doesn't know which models I want to go ahead and actually machine out, but this is something that I can come in here, right, and select. You can do individual selections. You can select, hold shift, and select those components, right? If you take a look at the stock, it automatically selects that stock, the stock width, stock depth. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. And just like that, we just created our first setup for that part, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the stock for this one, right? And now if I wanted to add a laser toolpath, I can come in here, select the toolpath. I want to say that there's a cutting somewhere around here, sample tools, profile tools inch. There's a laser cutter there. Select this, select that profile, say select same planar faces, and say okay. Right, and just like that, I created a profile, right? Within under 5-10 minutes, I can go ahead and go from nest to the actual manufacturing of the part here. So really neat functionality. Like I said, the reason why it actually exports as a 3D model is because I selected that option in the nest study, right? So I selected that output to create manufacturing model. If you don't want to see that, I can go ahead and let me go back to this nest and let me just deselect create manufacturing model. I'd say okay. And so there's this second study. If I take a look at this sheet quantity, right, notice that it gives me sheets or it gives me DXFs, right? So now I can go ahead and export this out and it's going to export out as a DXF, right? So again, two different options here. It really depends on what you select for your output, right? So just be aware of that. And then just want to make sure I didn't forget anything here. So yeah, so that was really going to be the last step, right? Is actually adding toolpath to your parts, and that's what all of this was about. Just going from your actual design. So we had a hand sanitizer assembly. We made sure that it was a sheet metal component or it was comprised of sheet metal components. You actually can add from different sources. I think that was a question that we got in the or earlier. If you go into your sources, you can add additional components, right? So if I click plus, it'll take you to the same data panel, right? You can select specific projects or specific customers, and then add additional components to it, right? So you're not just limited to working on one project only. So let's go back to the PowerPoint here. And so this is a good time to ask questions. Looking through it, I don't see many questions coming through. So again, feel free to ask questions, whether it's on Fusion 360, in vendor nesting utility. If you guys maybe want to just talk a little bit about comparing both. I'm very familiar with both tools. To be completely honest, they can both do pretty much the same exact thing, right? The workflow is going to be very similar. As of right now, I don't think there's more functionality in one that the other one can do. I think for the most part, it's going to be very similar. So yeah, so hopefully you guys were able to pick up a thing or two here on today's webinar. Again, if you guys have any feedback, if you guys have any comments, concerns about these webinars, please let us know. But yeah, as of right now, it doesn't look like we have many questions coming through. So with that, guys, I want to thank you for again taking some time out of your busy schedule here and watching us live. If you guys are watching us on YouTube, again, ask questions, reach out. But with that, have a great rest of the day, and